Welcome to the AEN Stories channel.
Let's dive in, because this story has been simmering inside me for what feels like an eternity. A slow burn that started with a flicker and grew into a blaze I couldn't ignore. It wasn't a dramatic discovery, no lipstick smeared on a collar, like in those old detective novels. No mysterious hotel receipts fluttering out of a pocket. No late-night phone calls that I stumbled upon by accident, whispering secrets into the dark. It was a dance floor, a simple, crowded dance floor at a retirement party. Not for her, not for me, for her former middle school teacher, of all people. Yeah, that's where the cracks in our marriage first showed, subtle at first, like hairline fractures in glass that you don't notice until the whole thing shatters under pressure. The party was one of those obligatory events you drag yourself to out of politeness, held in a rented community hall with faded streamers dangling from the ceiling and a buffet table sagging under the weight of potluck dishes. The DJ had just finished playing Sweet Caroline for what felt like the 7th time that evening, the crowd belting out the chorus with forced enthusiasm. And I was sitting at a corner table decorated with tacky plastic flamingos and a bowl of sweaty cheese cubes that no one dared touch. I was wondering when it would be socially acceptable to make our exit, maybe after the cake cutting, or once the speeches, wrapped up sipping a lukewarm beer and scrolling through my phone to pass the time. That's when I glanced over at the dance floor, drawn by the thump of the bass and the swirl of colours from spinning dresses. And there she was, my wife, Hazel, spinning around with a man I'd never seen before in my life. Now, I'm not stupid, not the dramatic type who jumps to conclusions, and definitely not the jealous husband who sees threats in every friendly conversation. But something about this scene was off, too close, too smooth, too rehearsed, like they'd done this before in some private rehearsal I wasn't invited to. His hand was on her waist, guiding her with an ease that spoke of familiarity, her head thrown back in laughter that echoed across the room. I felt a knot form in my stomach, tight and unyielding. I stood up slowly, weaving through the clusters of chatting guests, and waited at the edge of the dance floor until the song faded out. She looked surprised to see me there, her cheeks flushed from the exertion, her eyes wide for a split second before she composed herself. "I didn't know you liked dancing," she said, breathless, as if she hadn't just been twirling in someone else's arms 5 seconds ago, as if this was perfectly normal. "I don't," I replied, my voice steady but low, trying to keep the edge out of it. "But I don't like being invisible either," I thought, the words unspoken but heavy in my mind. She rolled her eyes then, that familiar gesture she perfected over the years, like I was the one being unreasonable, like my concern was just another overreaction in a long line of them. That's when I said it quiet, calm, like I was reading it off a cue card I'd prepared in my mind 100 times during sleepless nights. "If you dance with him again, don't expect me to be here when you return." The words hung in the air between us, simple but loaded, a line drawn in the sand that I hoped she'd respect. And you know what she did? She laughed, not in a mean way, not cruel like a villain in a story, but worse, she laughed like I was telling some pathetic joke, like I was the clown in the middle of the party, trying too hard to be taken seriously, my words bouncing off her like rain on a window. Then she turned her back and walked away, back to him, back to that dance floor where the lights spun and the music pulsed, leaving me standing there frozen in place, holding nothing but the echo of her laugh and the crushing realization that I wasn't losing her in that moment. I'd already lost her, somewhere along the way, in the quiet erosion of our days together. The laughter wasn't mocking, it was dismissive, as if my feelings were an inconvenience, a minor glitch in her evening's programming. I felt the room close in, the chatter and music blending into a dull roar, my chest tight with a pain that wasn't sharp but deep, like a bruise spreading under the skin. I didn't leave the party that night, even though every cell in my body screamed at me to grab my coat and walk out into the cool evening air, to drive home alone and let the silence wash over me. Instead, I just sat back down at the table like a coward, like a kid who wasn't invited to play, but lingered on the sidelines anyway, watching her from across the room as she continued dancing with him. He was taller than me, younger maybe, with that smug, overly comfortable grin plastered on his face, like he knew I wasn't a threat, like he owned the space around her, in a way I no longer did. And maybe he was right, maybe I'd become the background character in my own story, the reliable husband who didn't make waves, who let things slide because conflict felt too exhausting. Hazel didn't glance back once, not even when she stopped to grab a drink from the punch bowl, her hand brushing his as they shared a private joke. Not even when they slow danced to 2 songs in a row, her head resting on his shoulder, just a fraction too long. While I sat alone, chewing stale pretzels that tasted like cardboard and swallowing the rising pressure in my chest, the kind that makes your throat ache with inch tears. No guilt flickered across her face. No second thoughts seemed to cross her mind, just her dress twirling under the disco lights, her hand resting too low on someone else's back. A scene that played out like a slow-motion nightmare I couldn't wake from. Later that night, she finally returned to the table, her cheeks flushed from the dancing and the heat of the room, laughing at some joke he had whispered to her as she walked away from him. She plopped down next to me, still glowing with that energy I hadn't seen in her 4 months, maybe years. "You're quiet," she said, as if I hadn't just watched my own wife parade across the room with a man I'd never met, as if the evening hadn't carved a chasm between us. I stared at her, not angry, not loud, just defeated, the weight of the moment pressing down like an invisible hand. "Do you even care what that looked like?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper, hoping for some acknowledgement, some sign that she understood the hurt. Her expression didn't change. Not even a flicker of shame crossed her features, not a hint of regret in her eyes. Looked like to people dancing. Don't be dramatic. There it was again, that word, dramatic, thrown out like a shield, as if feeling forgotten in your own marriage was just a performance, as if drawing a line in the sand was childish and unworthy of serious consideration. She reached for my hand across the table like that would make it better, like a casual touch could erase the scene I'd just witnessed, but I didn't take it, my fingers curling into my palm instead. "You laughed at me," I said quietly, the words tasting bitter on my tongue. "When I told you not to dance with him again, you laughed." She leaned back in her chair and gave me this half sigh, half laugh sound that I'll never forget, a noise that echoed in my mind long after the party ended, because it was funny to her. "Lel, you were being all serious like you were going to storm off in a movie. I didn't think you meant it." But I meant it, not in the dramatic sense, not in a pack my bags tonight and never look back kind of way, but in a deeper, more profound shift inside me. I meant that if she crossed that line again of disrespect, of ignoring how I felt, of treating me like an afterthought, something inside me would shift irrevocably. Something already had, a quiet realignment of my heart, a realization that the woman I loved had become a stranger, one who laughed at my boundaries instead of honoring them. The car ride home was silent, the kind of silence that presses in from all sides, thick and oppressive. She was on her phone most of the time, her screen glowing in the dark interior, probably texting her friends about how sensitive I'd been that evening, how I'd overreacted to a harmless dance. I didn't ask. I didn't want the answer, didn't want to hear the justifications or the dismissals. The street lights flickered across the windshield as I stared straight ahead, gripping the wheel tighter than I needed to, my knuckles white in the dim glow. When we got home, she went straight to the shower, the sound of water running a familiar backdrop to our evenings. I sat on the edge of the bed, the mattress dipping under my weight, and opened her tablet. She rarely logged out of anything. Trust, or perhaps complacency, had made her careless. Part of me didn't even want to look, didn't want to confirm what my gut was screaming, but I did, not because I wanted to find something damning, but because I needed to know I wasn't insane, that the knot in my stomach wasn't just paranoia. What I found wasn't shocking in the explosive sense, it was worse than that. It was expected, a confirmation of the slow drift I'd felt but ignored. There were messages, weeks of them, chat threads with a name saved as CS, which meant nothing to me at first glance. But the tone of the conversations, I knew exactly what it was. Flirting wrapped in inside jokes, shared photos of sunsets and coffee cups, plans to meet up again soon. No direct confessions of love, No explicit details that would make it undeniable, but enough breadcrumbs to paint the whole picture, to fill in the blanks I'd been avoiding. And one message, sent the morning of the party, hit like a brick to the chest. If he shows up, I'll handle it. He doesn't make scenes. Don't worry, he's me. The grammar was off, but the meaning was clear. He was talking about me, reducing me to he, an obstacle to be managed, not a husband to be considered. I didn't sleep that night. Hazel slipped into bed after her shower, her hair damp and smelling of her vanilla shampoo, the scent clinging to the sheets like a memory I no longer wanted. And just like that, she was out cold, her breathing even and peaceful, as if nothing had happened, as if she hadn't laughed in my face and danced with a man who referred to me like I was an afterthought in a story where I used to be the main character. I lay there next to her, my eyes wide open, staring at the ceiling fan as it creaked with every slow spin, the blades cutting through the shadows. I could feel the air moving, but it didn't cool me down. It just reminded me I was still awake, still trapped in the same house, in the same marriage, next to someone I no longer recognized, someone who had drifted so far that I was left holding the empty space where she used to be. The next morning, I didn't say anything about what I'd found. I made coffee, the pot gurgling as I measured out the grounds, the aroma filling the kitchen like it did every day. I watched her scroll through her phone while humming along to some upbeat song on the radio, her fingers flying across the screen with purpose. She was chipper, like someone who had shaken off the night's awkwardness without a second thought. It was like watching someone rehearse a version of themselves for a role they didn't care about anymore, going through the motions with practiced ease. I asked her how she slept, my voice neutral. She said, "Great," without looking up, as if she hadn't destroyed something fragile the night before with her laughter and her choices. I nodded and sipped my coffee, the hot liquid burning my tongue, but not enough to distract from the ache in my chest. I wanted to scream, to shake her and demand answers, but I didn't confront her. Not yet. I needed to be sure I wasn't walking into another gaslighting session, where she'd twist my words and make me doubt my own eyes. I needed more than gut feelings and a couple of vague messages. I wanted her to confess, not because I craved punishment, but because I wanted to see she was still capable of honesty. If there was any remnant of the woman I'd married left under the layers of deceit. So, I played along 4 days, wearing a mask of normalcy that felt heavier with each passing hour. I kissed her goodnight, my lips brushing her cheek with the same familiarity as always. I brought her tea in the evenings, steaming mug in hand, as she typed away on her laptop. I listened to her stories about work, about her colleague Layla, who was always drama, about the new yoga instructor she wasn't sure about, nodding along with feigned interest. And at night, when the house was quiet, I combed through every digital corner she hadn't locked away: emails, calendar entries, her photo cloud storage. It's amazing how carelessly people cheat when they think the person they're betraying is too passive to notice, too trusting to question. I found a shared photo album, not with me, with him. See Scalvin Saunders. His face finally had a name, her identity beyond the shadows. Apparently, he was a friend from the community theatre group she'd briefly joined last spring. I remembered her quitting after a few weeks, saying it wasn't her vibe, that the rehearsals conflicted with her schedule. Turns out she quit the group, but not the man. There were pictures of them walking through a farmer's market, arms linked as they sampled fresh fruit sitting on a bench near the lake, her head on his shoulder as the sun set, sharing one milkshake with 2 straws at an ice cream parlor, their faces close and laughing. Not scandalous photos in the explicit sense, but deeply intimate, the kind you take when you think no one's watching, when the world narrows to just the two of you. The kind she never took with me after the honeymoon phase ended, when life became about routines instead of romance. Each image screamed one message. This was not just a fling, a momentary lapse. This was something sustained, something that had roots. So, I did something pathetic, something I never thought I'd do in a million years. I printed the photos, not to confront her with them, not yet, but to see them in physical form, to hold them in my hands and prove to myself it was real, that I wasn't going crazy, that I hadn't fabricated this betrayal in my head out of insecurity or neediness. I taped them behind a drawer in the garage, hidden among old tools and forgotten projects, like a quiet little graveyard of our marriage, a secret memorial to what we'd lost. I stared at them for a long time before sliding the drawer shut, the wood scraping like a final sigh. That night, after she fell asleep, I asked her a question she couldn't hear. Why him? I whispered it into the dark, the words hanging in the air like smoke, hoping they might find their way into her dreams and stir some remorse. She didn't answer, of course, but I think I already knew deep down it was the thrill, the novelty, the way he made her feel seen in a way I no longer did. 3 days after the party, I received a voicemail I wasn't supposed to hear. It came from an unknown number, no name, just a string of digits that meant nothing to me at first. I almost didn't check it, my thumb hovering over the delete button. I usually let those go to voicemail hell, but something made me listen. Maybe instinct, maybe the way Hazel had been humming again that morning, like someone floating through life untouched by consequence, her mood to light for the tension between us. Maybe I was just tired of pretending I didn't care, of burying my head in the sand. The message started mid-sentence, a man's voice, confident, smooth, comfortable for a stranger. I told her that dress was a terrible idea if she didn't want me staring all night. And of course, she wore it anyway. A pause, then a breathy chuckle. Anyway, can't wait to see you Friday. I booked the back booth again, same as last time. Don't be late. And hey, if he asks where you're going, just say it's book club or yoga or whatever it is this week. Click. The line went dead. I stood in the hallway, holding my phone like it was a grenade with the pin pulled, my breath caught in my throat. I played it again and again, the words sinking deeper each time. If he asks, I was he again, always just he, a placeholder, an obstacle to be navigated around. That evening, when Hazel walked through the front door with a shopping bag and a fake smile plastered on her face, I didn't say anything. I just watched her float around the kitchen like a performer on stage, setting down her things, chattering about how crowded the grocery store was, and how Karen from her office wore the exact same blazer as their manager and had a meltdown over it. She asked how my day was. I said, quiet. She didn't ask what I meant, didn't probe the silence. After dinner, she said she had yoga the next evening and asked if I needed the car. I said no, my voice flat. Then I went into the garage and stared at those photos again, the ones she never knew I found. My heart didn't break this time, that had already happened. Now I just felt detached, like I was watching someone else's life unfold from a distance, a spectator to my own unraveling. The next morning, while she was in the shower, the steam fogging the mirror, I slipped her phone from the nightstand and used the unlock code I'd seen her type in a week ago. She'd changed it, but not carefully enough. I guessed it on the third try. Our anniversary date with a twist. I didn't have to dig far. There were messages with Calvin, dozens of them. She'd renamed him Ruth, probably thought it was clever, a disguise no one would question. Their texts weren't just emotional, they were plans, references to secret meetings, laughing about my cluelessness, even inside jokes about my predictable habits, like how I always made coffee the same way every morning. I was a running joke in my own marriage, reduced to punchlines in their private world. I wanted to confront her right then, to scream and demand answers, but instead, I took a screenshot of the most damning message one, where she wrote, "Can't wait to see you tonight, Michael thinks I'm at yoga again," and emailed it to myself from her phone. Then I put it back exactly where I found it, my fingers steady despite the rage simmering inside. And that evening, when she slipped on that same swishy blue dress and said she was heading to yoga, her yoga mat slung over her shoulder for show, I kissed her on the cheek and told her to drive safe. I waited until the garage door shut with its familiar rumble, her car backing out and disappearing down the street. Then I picked up my phone and opened a new note, not to rant, not to beg, but to finally write down the truth I'd been avoiding for too long. A single sentence, typed slowly, deliberately, she's not going to yoga, because admitting it to myself was the first real decision I'd made in months. The first step out of the shadows she'd cast over me. I didn't follow her right away. I waited, giving her time to settle into her lie, to believe she was safe in her deception. She left at 6:12 p.m., yoga mat slung over her shoulder, water bottle in hand, wearing that smug smile of someone who thinks they've already won the game. She even kissed me at the door, one of those distracted pecks she gave without thought, like I was a habit, not a husband, a routine to be maintained. I watched her pull out of the driveway and disappear around the corner, her taillights fading into the twilight, like I hadn't just seen the real location in the text messages she thought she'd hidden so cleverly. I gave it 15 minutes, long enough for her to get ahead. Then I grabbed my keys, slid into the car, and headed downtown, my heart pounding but my resolve steel. The address from the messages wasn't a yoga studio with mats and calming music. It was a restaurant, one of those dimly lit, overpriced places with leather booths and wine lists longer than the menu. The kind of spot where dates happen, not workouts. I'd never been there. She had, once telling me it was too much for us, too fancy for our budget. Funny how too much for us was just right for her and Calvin, a place to hide in plain sight. I parked across the street, in the shadow of a closed shop, and stayed in the car, heart pounding, palms sweaty on the wheel, breath shallow as I scanned the entrance. I felt ridiculous, like some washed-up detective in a cheap crime movie, waiting to catch his cheating wife in the act, complete with a fedora and a cigarette. I didn't smoke. But this wasn't a movie. This was my life, my crumbling, hollow life, reduced to surveillance and suspicion. At 6:45, she walked in, not in yoga pants and sneakers, not with a mat under her arm. She wore the same blue dress from the party, heels she hadn't touched in years, clacking on the sidewalk, and makeup she never bothered putting on for our dinners at home. Calvin met her at the entrance, his arm slipping around her waist like it belonged there. They kissed, not a quick greeting, but a habit, familiar and unhurried. I didn't take pictures. I didn't storm in and cause a scene. I just watched, my breath fogging the window. And for the first time, I wasn't angry, wasn't sad in the gut-wrenching way. I was detached, like someone had switched off the emotional part of me, leaving an observer in my place. I was left watching this strange, cruel comedy unfold in real time, a play where I was the unwitting audience. They got a booth near the back, ordered wine that glowed red under the low lights, laughed with heads close together, leaned in like magnets drawn by invisible force. Her hand was on his thigh under the table. His fingers brushed her wrist as he spoke. Everything about them screamed comfort, intimacy, familiarity, the kind of ease that takes time to build, the kind she used to give me without thinking, now offered to someone else like I'd never mattered, like our years together were just practice for this. After 45 minutes, I left, not because I couldn't take it anymore, but because I finally understood that there was nothing left to fight for, nothing worth salvaging from the ruins. I didn't want revenge. I didn't want to beg for explanations or promises. I just wanted out, to step away from the wreckage and breathe clean air. Back at home, I didn't wait up for her. I didn't pace or rehearse confrontations. I just smiled when she came in late, smelling like wine and stranger's cologne, her story ready. Class ran long. Then we grabbed drinks. I nodded, said sounds fun, and went to bed. But I stayed up and wrote a letter. It wasn't a confession of my pain or a rage-filled manifesto. It was quiet, clean, precise like me, I suppose. I listed everything I knew, dates from the messages, the photos I'd printed, the voicemail I'd saved, the restaurant I'd seen her enter. I told her I wasn't going to make a scene, that I wouldn't ruin her reputation or tell our friends the details, that she didn't need to lie anymore because I was done believing. I ended it with the only honest sentence I had left. I deserved more than your laughter. Then I printed it, folded it neatly, and slipped it into the drawer of her vanity, under the bracelets she never wore anymore, a silent time bomb waiting to be discovered. The next morning, I woke up before she did, the dawn light filtering through the curtains in soft grey streaks. I packed a bag, just the basics, clothes for a week, my laptop, a few books that had been my escape during the lonely evenings. No note on the kitchen table, no goodbye scrawled in haste, just the truth sitting in that drawer, waiting to be read when she opened it for her makeup or jewelry. As I closed the door behind me, the lock clicking with finality, I didn't feel free or strong, not yet, but I didn't feel invisible either. Didn't feel like the man who'd stood on the sidelines while his life happened without him. I felt like I'd taken the first step into something new, something mine. Hazel didn't call that first day. She probably assumed I was sulking somewhere, licking my wounds like I always did in our minor arguments, that I'd come home after a walk around the block or a drive to clear my head. Maybe she even thought I'd apologize for misunderstanding the situation again, for being dramatic about a dance or a late night. But by the evening, I know she must have felt it, that weight, that eerie silence that fills a house when someone who used to belong there suddenly doesn't, when the routines break and the emptiness echoes. I turned my phone off after leaving, not to punish her, but because I just didn't want her voice in my ear pretending nothing had happened. I didn't want the fake concern or the faux confusion. Lel, what's going on? As if she didn't know exactly what she'd done, as if her choices haven't led us here. I spent the night in a cheap motel, an hour out of town, the kind with flickering hallway lights and scratchy bed sheets, where everything smells faintly like bleach and lost dreams. The walls thin enough to hear the murmurs of other guests' lives. But for once, I slept. I actually slept, not well, not deeply, but without waking up in a cold sweat, wondering where my wife was, or who she was texting under the covers. The next morning, I turned my phone on, the screen lighting up with notifications. 6 missed calls, 4 texts, all from Hazel. The first was casual, almost breezy. "Hey, did you take the car this morning?" The second a little sharper, edged with irritation. "Lel, where are you? You didn't say anything last night." The third felt strained, the worrying creeping in. "Can you stop ignoring me? This isn't funny." And the last one stopped me cold, my finger hovering over the screen. "What did you put in my drawer?" She'd found it, the letter, the truth I'd laid out in black and white. I didn't reply, couldn't bring myself to. I stared at the message, rereading that one sentence like it held some deeper meaning. But it was exactly what it sounded like, her realizing that I wasn't bluffing anymore, that the game she'd been playing had real consequences. The following hours were a blur of motion without purpose. I walked around a lake I didn't know the name of, the water lapping at the shore in rhythmic whispers, ducks gliding across the surface like nothing had changed in their world. I ate cold fries in my car, the wrapper crinkling as I sat in a parking lot, staring at nothing. I tried not to spiral into self-pity or anger, but even with everything that had happened, the lies, the messages, the kiss in that restaurant, I still felt guilty. Isn't that pathetic? Like I was the one who broke something sacred by walking away, by refusing to play the role of the oblivious husband any longer. At 6:17 p.m., she called again. I let it ring out, the vibration buzzing against my thigh like an insistent reminder. Then I played the voicemail, her voice cracking through the speaker, not quite crying, but on the edge of it, teetering. "Lel, please. I didn't think you'd just disappear like this. You should have talked to me. This is so unlike you." Exactly, that was the point. It was unlike me. For once, I didn't shrink back into the shadows. I didn't stay quiet and wait for her to finish choosing someone else over me before asking if I could maybe have a turn in her attention. I left. That night, she sent one final text, the screen glowing in the dim motel room. "If you want to talk, I'll be home. I'm not with anyone." I swear. Too late. Way too late. I didn't need her to swear anymore. I needed her to mean something before the moment passed, before the laughter at my expense became the soundtrack of our end. And it had passed. She laughed when I drew the line at the party. She stepped over it without a second thought. Then she danced all over it in heels I never even knew she still owned, twirling away from the life we'd built. And now she wanted to talk. Funny how silence gets loud when you're not in control of it. How the absence of someone you took for granted echoes like thunder in an empty room. 3 days passed before I saw her again. I didn't answer her messages, didn't respond to the voicemails that piled up like unanswered questions. I needed time not to forgive or forget, but to decide. Not about her, I'd already made up my mind on that front. I needed to decide what pieces of my old life were still worth keeping, what fragments of the past could be salvaged from the wreckage. And there weren't many. But there was one thing that stood out, a small battered wooden box that had belonged to my grandfather. He gave it to me when I turned 16, his hands rough from years of labor, and told me, "This box holds everything that ever mattered to me. Fill it with things that matter to you." I kept it tucked away in the top of our bedroom closet, beneath an old winter coat gathering dust and some of Hazel's designer handbags she never used. I hadn't opened it in years, but I knew exactly what was in there. A letter from my mother written before she passed, a childhood photo of me and my sister grinning toothlessly at the camera, the first ticket stub from a movie Hazel and I saw when we were still dating, young and full of promise. I went back for the box. I parked 2 blocks from the house, the street quiet under the afternoon sun, birds chirping like nothing had changed. I didn't want her to hear me pull in, didn't want the confrontation yet. The porch light was on, even in daylight, curtains drawn tight against the world. I knew she was home, her car in the driveway, a silent sentinel. I hoped she was asleep, but I wasn't counting on it. I still had my key, the metal cold in my palm. The moment it turned in the lock, I felt my stomach twist, a mix of nostalgia and nausea. The smell of cinnamon hit me instantly. She'd lit one of those scented candles she always used when she wanted the place to feel warm and safe, a habit from our early days. Ironic, considering what the house had turned into, a stage for deception, a shell of what it once was. I stepped inside quietly, the door creaking softly despite my care. No lights on, just the faint glow filtering from the kitchen, casting long shadows across the hallway. I moved through the space like a ghost, avoiding the floorboard near the stairs that always creaked underfoot, my heart racing not from fear, but from the unfamiliarity of being in my own home as a stranger, an intruder in the life I'd built. Upstairs, I opened the closet, the hinges whispering, and pulled down the box from its hiding spot. It felt heavier than I remembered, maybe from the weight of memory packed inside, or perhaps from the years it had sat untouched. I held it for a moment, tracing the worn edges, before turning to leave, and that's when I saw her. She was standing in the doorway, barefoot, wearing one of my old t-shirts that hung loose on her frame. Her eyes were swollen, red-rimmed from crying or lack of sleep. She didn't speak at first. She just looked at the box in my hands like it was a bomb, ready to explode. "Is that all you came for?" she asked finally, her voice raw, scraped thin by emotion. I didn't answer right away. I studied her, not the woman she used to be, vibrant and full of life, but who she was now, stripped down to something painfully human, vulnerable in a way I hadn't seen in years. There was no act left, no charm to hide behind, no clever excuses at the ready, and I didn't feel satisfaction at her pain, didn't feel justice served. I felt tired, bone-deep weary. "I came for what still matters," I said, my voice even. She stepped forward, reaching out a hand that trembled slightly. "Lel, please just talk to me. We can fix this." I laughed, then not cruelly, just softly, a sound that surprised even me. "Fix what, Hazel? The affair, the lies, the fact that I had to read messages between you and him, was eavesdropping on my own funeral." Her face crumpled, tears welling, but I didn't stop, the words flowing now. "You called me predictable, said I wouldn't make a scene. You were right. I didn't. I'm not here to make one now. I just want what's mine, so I can leave with the only dignity I have left." She tried again, her voice breaking. "It wasn't what you think." I looked her in the eyes, holding her gaze. "It never is until it is." And with that, I walked past her, the box under my arm. She didn't follow. She didn't scream or grab at me. She just stood there, trembling, holding the silence like it was all she had left, the weight of her choices finally settling on her shoulders. I left the house without looking back, the door closing behind me with a soft click, that echoed like the end of an era. It's been 8 months since I walked out of that house with nothing but a small wooden box and the weight of everything she threw away. I won't lie and say it was easy. The first few weeks felt like standing in the middle of a collapsed building, trying to remember what it looked like before the walls caved in, sifting through rubble for anything salvageable. Every morning, I'd wake up and instinctively check my phone for her name, forgetting for a moment that there was no one left to text me good morning with a heart emoji and a lie tucked behind it. But something strange happened after the silence settled in. After the initial storm of emotions passed, I started to feel calm, a quiet that wasn't empty but peaceful. It wasn't a dramatic recovery, no whirlwind reinvention where I suddenly became a new man overnight. No, it was just small, quiet choices that built on each other like bricks in a wall. I moved into a small apartment closer to the lake, a place with high ceilings and big windows that let in the light. Nothing fancy, but mine alone. I started walking every day, along the water's edge, listening to the waves lap at the shore and the birds call overhead. I bought a journal and filled it with thoughts I never shared with anyone, words that poured out like a release. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, I stopped feeling like the man who had been cheated on and started feeling like a man who got a second chance at life, unburdened by the expectations of someone else's story. Then 2 months ago, I opened the box for the first time in years, really looked at what was inside with fresh eyes. The letter from my mom reminded me that I'd been loved deeply once, unconditionally. Her words are balm on old wounds. The photo of me and my sister made me laugh out loud. God, we were such weird kids, gap-toothed grins and messy hair. And that movie ticket, the one from our first date with Hazel, I threw it away not out of spite or bitterness, but out of freedom. That memory didn't hurt anymore. It didn't hold power over me. It didn't belong to her anymore. It belonged to a version of me that needed to let go to move forward. Hazel emailed me once, a long, rambling apology that popped up in my inbox like a ghost from the past. She said she missed me, that she made a mistake, that Calvin wasn't what she thought he was, and that things weren't serious between them after all. She asked if we could meet for coffee, to talk like adults. I didn't reply, not because I'm bitter, I'm not anymore, but because her chapter in my story is over. I'm not writing in the margins of her life anymore, not waiting for scraps of attention or affection. Last weekend, I stood by the lake just after sunset, watching the water shimmer in the orange light, the sky painted in hues of pink and gold. A little girl ran past me, chasing a dog with gleeful shrieks, and her father called after her, laughing warmly. And I thought, this is what peace feels like. Not loud, not grand, just still, like the surface of the water after a storm has passed. I don't know what comes next. Maybe a new job, one that excites me instead of just paying the bills. Maybe a new city, with fresh streets to explore and new faces to meet. Maybe one day even someone new, who sees me without needing me to prove my worth. But whatever it is, I'll face it without being the version of me that stood quietly in corners while someone else decided whether I mattered or not. I decide now. And if you've made it this far, thank you. You didn't just listen to a story about betrayal, you witnessed a man learning how to stop being invisible, to step into his own light. Comment below. What's a real historical event that taught you something about letting go or starting over? Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share your own story if you've ever had to walk away to find yourself.